operation that you kind of got the understanding of being there over time that that's what was going to happen, even though, of course, that wasn't a topic of public conversation. I still remember once flying a guy that had been an instructor at West Point that I'd known there. He was a major, and he was talking with somebody else on the plane, and I was just flying them wherever they wanted to go in the canal zone. And they were talking about all these things that were going to happen, and I was like, this sounds like, the war. And I'm like, I don't think even though I had a top secret clearance, I'm like, I don't think I have a need to know this stuff, But I think everyone, like I said, sort of figured that out. So we'd be rotating down there to Panama, and then when we were back in the field, we'd be back at Fort Ord, we'd be back in the field. And we were just really completely overextended, where my unit had the highest resignation rate for commissioned officers in the entire Army, because you were in Panama, and then when you came back from Panama, you were in the field training, with the unit back there.
Wow. And so you were down there for, what you said, 2.5 years, or back and forth between?
Yeah, back and forth, exactly, over that 2.5 year period. So half of our unit would be down in Panama, half would be at Fort Ord, and we just, rotate back and forth.
And what, from after that 2.5 years going back and forth, being at the base and being down in Panama, what was your military service after that, or was that kind of the end of it there?
Well, first off, what it allowed me to do being in Panama was become a pilot in command, which, you've got warrant officers in the Army, and they're the sort of primary pilots, and commissioned officers are more secondary. But because I was in Panama and because of that mission, I got to fly a ton where I wouldn't have otherwise, and I got to become a pilot in command, and I got to fly more night vision goggle hours our unit did than anyone in the Army, except for the Task Force 160, the special ops, the Black Hawk guys. And when they shut down my unit and rolled it up into Fort Lewis up in Washington State, they rolled us into the Task Force 160. My unit became then. So what Panama did for me was allow me to fly a lot more than I would have and become a good pilot who knew how to fly night vision goggles. So and then Panama itself, Operation Just Cause itself, half our unit was already down there. I joined them, with the rest of half of our unit a couple days later when the thing kicked off. And really the fighting happened in the first day. We went out and secured the rest of the country. Seen if anyone wanted to fight with us, as it were, and of course they didn't. And so obviously nothing like Iraq or Afghanistan as far as the things that went on there. But this was a big drug war mission. It was the world's largest counterinsurgency operation. It was an opportunity to test out all these new pieces of equipment, the stealth fighter, do a counterinsurgency operation. And so it was, Noriega was our guy, and then he kind of went a little bit rogue and, went a little bit, took the leash off, and then we said, okay, we've got to reel you in, a regime change, just like we do with all our other guys that we put in and, need to be reeled back in.
Well, it's interesting you touched on the idea of this drug war, right? Yeah. And that, where we are now and what this movie's about and everything else. What sort of things can you talk about there? I mean, looking back at your mission there to where you are now and what's starting to go on with, it's not cocaine, but like just the entire drug war and what that's done.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'd back up to Hawaii. So I grew up in Hawaii in the 70s, where cannabis was totally decriminalized. It was part of the culture, and there was no drug trade, even though drugs came in because it was homegrown, and it was great. Cannabis was, Hawaii was a cannabis mecca. I was 3 years there behind Obama, and then what happened is in the, I think right in the early 80s, Operation Green Harvest. So you had this whole military, machine that you'd built, and now is this sort of, at that time seemed like the military thing was winding down. How do we repurpose and how do we use these resources? And they started to use military helicopters for the first time in civilian drug operations in Hawaii for Operation Green Harvest. So, and then they started doing that in California with these. So basically you had the Black Hawk pilots who, let's say, had been flying in Panama, some of them, for Operation Just Cause, now were redeployed, repurposed to fighting the drug war in the U.S. And what you got in Hawaii was the nation's first and worst meth epidemic. So you suppressed cannabis, and then meth, which came from Japan, which is kind of culturally integrated there, use it for in the business world to work the long hours and everything. Is it just naturally came into Hawaii to fill that void, and now you can see across the rest of the country what they gave us, and it was the first time again where they were violating posse comitatus, which is you're not supposed to use U.S. military for civilian operations. The only way that comes close is if you're in the National Guard, for national emergencies. So we're basically using the military machine to fight the drug war. We did it in Panama. That was part of the drug war, and then continued it on. So.
Yeah, and the drug war, what has it gotten us at this point, right? I mean, how spending these trillions of dollars over the last 20, 30 years, 40 years even, and not treating people, but treating everybody as criminals as a sense. So, especially with just marijuana, what that does. You want to give us a little bit of a brief history on your introduction to cannabis and kind of plant medicine in general, what started happening there for you?
Yeah, so like I said, cannabis was totally decriminalized. I think I probably may have tried to get high. I think maybe probably in middle school, unsuccessfully, I think, But I remember the first time I really got high was in 9th grade with a bunch of guys on my soccer team, and it was actually brownies. But just that classic lesson of, even though that was strong, eating brownies, I was with people that cared about me, that I cared about, that I loved, who I trusted, and so I had a great time. And so Hawaii was like, on the weekends, going and playing soccer and going to, like these beautiful creeks and waterfalls and stuff in Hawaii, and smoking some herb or drinking some beers, and then mushrooms grew around my high school. Where I went to high school, there was cow pastures all around. So I had a mushroom experience in high school that didn't. Well, it had an interesting end. I was already probably consumed too much alcohol, probably too high, and then a friend had mushrooms that he picked right around like I said, my high school, and no supervision, no guidance, no nothing. Just took too many mushrooms and somehow managed to make it home with my my best friend, and then I got home and I was just freeform hallucinating, like animals from the African savannah, rhinoceroses, giraffes, and in retrospect, without those other things, the alcohol and cannabis, who knows? It could have been just an amazing, awesome experience. But I had a negative reaction to it. Went in the bathroom, started throwing up, and of course my parents didn't know what to do. So their solution was, let's take him to the hospital. He's overdosed on drugs. And so they did, and I think fortunately I had somebody there. I had to go all the way to Honolulu, who worked in Haight-Ashbury and knew at least how to take care of people and not demonize them. But basically, they gave me something that just completely knocked me out. Thorazine, maybe, I think. Yeah, Thorazine back then. This would have been like 81, around there. Yeah, Thorazine, and I woke up a day and a half. That was Friday night. I woke up Sunday. So my parents were freaked just because they didn't, this is not in their worldview. And I was totally fine, and it didn't stop me from coming back to the plant medicines, but definitely was a significant experience. And so, but in the Army, they started drug testing, so I had to watch out for that. And really, at West Point in the Army, stayed away from any of that, and even alcohol, because I saw how people were abusing it, especially down in Panama. Go down there and have a couple girlfriends down there and hit the alcohol a lot, and I could see the dangers there. So for me, it wasn't until I got out of the military that I really